There is no question that we need to make smart decisions to tighten our belts and reduce our nation's debt and deficit. American families have done it around their kitchen table, and we owe it to them to get our fiscal house in order. But there's also one group of Americans that we owe an even greater promise to, a group who we can never allow to become pawns or fall through the cracks or be forgotten altogether in these budget debates. And that is our men and women in uniform and the veterans who have protected our nation for decades. And that's why I'm here today on the floor, in the midst of the whirlwind of debt and deficit rhetoric, to remind us all of the critical nature of the bill that is on the floor this week. To remind us all that no matter what fiscal crisis we face, no matter how divided we may be over approaches to cutting our debt and deficit, no matter how heated the rhetoric gets here in Washington, D.C., we have to keep our commitments to our veterans and service members, and we have to move this bill forward. And we have to provide for those who wore or who are wearing the uniform with the peace of mind that we are keeping up our promise to them. Now, Madam President, a couple of years ago, we took a proactive step to make sure that the nonstop wrangling over appropriations bills here in Congress didn't interfere with the health care that our veterans have earned. Thanks to the work of Senator Akaka and many others, the VA spending for health care is now appropriated a year in advance, protecting it from an imperfect budget process that is so often affected by politics. But I remember that when we passed advanced appropriations, we were very clear. Our foresight was not going to be an excuse to sit on our hands when VA funding was up for consideration. We were not going to allow a precautionary measure to get in the way of passing timely increases in veterans' health care. And so this bill is the test. Can we put politics aside for the good of our nation's veterans and service members? Can we show them that despite our differences, we will work as diligently towards getting them the benefits and care they've earned as they have worked for our nation? Well, I hope we can. And I say that because the investments in this bill are a lot more than numbers on a page. They are life-changing programs for veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury. It's support for suicide hotlines that are seeing more callers than ever before. It's providing roofs over the heads of our service members and their families. It's timely investments in the very biggest priorities of our nation's heroes. And so today I want to talk about just a few of the investments that are included in the bill that we're considering today and how they translate into the lives of our service members, our veterans, and critically, their families. Madam President, there is an influx of young veterans coming into the VA system right now like we have not seen in a very long time. In fact, the VA estimates that the number of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans in its healthcare system will reach well over 500,000 at some point next year. That is an over 100% increase since 2008. This is a big challenge, and one that we have no choice but to step up to meet if we're going to avoid some of the same mistakes we saw with the Vietnam generation. That's why this bill includes nearly $3 billion to meet the health care needs of veterans who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, which is a nearly $600 million increase over last year. But it's more than just the sheer number of new veterans that will be coming home to the VA in the near future. It's the extent of their wounds, both visible and invisible, that will require an untold resource from our nation. You know, through the wonders of modern medicine, service members who would have been lost in previous conflicts are coming home to live productive and fulfilling lives. But they will need a lifetime of care from the VA. And that's why part of this bill includes significant investments for research in a number of areas, including traumatic brain injury, spinal cord injury, polytrauma injuries, and sensory loss. It includes funding that will go to maintaining world-class prosthetics, like the one that was worn by Sergeant Leroy Petre, who I saw at the White House last week shake the hand of a grateful President Obama as he was awarded the Medal of Honor. It's also funding that comes at a critical time as amputations have sharply increased among soldiers in Afghanistan. many of whom are getting out of protected MRAP and Humvees to engage Afghan citizens and at the same time putting themselves at far greater risk of severe IED injuries. According to a recent Washington Post article, twice as many U.S. soldiers wounded in battle last year required limb amputations than in either of the 2 previous years. This funding also comes as mental health concerns continue to rise, and suicides among active duty troops and veterans from these wars have risen to a level now on par with combat deaths. In April, the VA suicide hotline took 14,000 suicide calls, more than they have taken in any month in the previous 4 years. So, Madam President, this bill makes sure we're putting someone on the other end of that call. This bill funds efforts to give veterans access to mental health professionals and ensures we're not leaving our veterans to go it alone. But, Madam President, this will do much more than help our newest generation of veterans. For generations, we have faced the problems of homelessness among our nation's veterans without making any real headway. Recently, through the success of programs like HUD-VASH and the Grant Per Diem program, we are seeing real progress towards putting homeless veterans into safe and secure housing. And the bold goals laid out by the Obama administration to end veterans' homelessness once and for all. So this bill includes nearly $1 billion in direct assistance to homeless veterans. And this bill helps those who've taken on the monumental but deeply personal task of providing care to an injured veteran in their family. Those people who have left behind their own careers and personal lives and even their own health care and benefits to care for those who can't take care of themselves. It includes major investments to meet the unique needs of one of the fastest growing groups of veterans, women veterans, who through health care and construction upgrades that improve privacy will benefit from VA facilities that are more conducive to their needs. This bill also includes major investments to fund military construction projects worldwide, including readiness centers, barracks, hospitals, clinics, and schools. It also supports family housing construction projects that ensure military families have a satisfactory roof over their heads. And that, by the way, will create thousands of good-paying jobs. As we all know, the strength of our military is rooted in the strength of the families that support them. Investments like these are what allows our service members to go abroad, knowing that their loved ones are being looked after by the nation that they are protecting. Madam President, after nearly a decade at war, the consequences of sending our service members into combat and the sacred obligation we have to care for those injured in service have become clear. But so have the shortcomings and the challenges we have to meet. Last week, I chaired a hearing on the gaps to mental health care that still exist at the VA, and the stories we heard were deeply frustrating. I heard the stories of 2 separate veterans who attempted suicide but were still left to wait for weeks and even months for appointments into the VA. We have to fix the way the VA meets that obligation so that they're more flexible and responsive to the needs of today's veterans. And we have to do it in a cost-effective way by making sure that we're getting the most value out of every dollar that a bill like this one provides. Next week in our committee, I will be examining the long-term costs of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan to our newest generation of veterans, because I believe we need to address this problem openly and honestly. Madam President, like generations of service members and veterans before them, today's heroes have done everything that has been asked of them. They've been separated from their families through repeat deployments. They have sacrificed life and limb in combat, and they've done all this selflessly and with honor to our country. We cannot allow our commitment to them to lapse or to get caught up in politics. That's why we need to pass this bill. And we must also come to a budget agreement that avoids default and the consequences that would have on our veterans. We have to keep our promise no matter what.